it's an interesting cultural phenomenon. It's just like, they say music is the universal language, and I really truly believe that is. I've met so many people from so many different backgrounds through music, and I have a special fondness for Ian's because my one of my favorite cousins from Trinidad is named Ian. So growing up, and then of course we were all 007 fans, so Ian Fleming. So I was just like, oh, Ian, I can't wait to meet him. And then I listened to the album and I was like, oh my God, he's fantastic.
Ian Fleming was one of my dad's favorite writers. So yeah,
Yeah, it's just like diving right in.
sure.
I love the fact that your dad encouraged your music.
Mhm.
So, I mean, maybe it's a trope, but I know in from where I come, music wasn't considered something serious. So it wasn't encouraged. I mean, and not that it wasn't encouraged as a avocation, but it wasn't encouraged as a vocation. So
Sure.
you're really blessed that, your dad really kind of was just like, yeah, you can do this. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with your pop.
No, he was so when I was about I think I was about 6 or so. He says that I was about 4 when I started piano lessons, and I don't think you can actually reach the pedals when you're 4 years old. So he had me in the car one day, and he said, "Do you want to start taking piano lessons?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." He was really interested in bringing me up. With a music background. He had kind of this thing. My father was an attorney, and he said it should happen in intervals. Now, your children should be, attorneys and doctors, and then their children should be artists. So I don't know. It was kind of a very strange way that he kind of looked at things, but he really wanted to raise me as a musician. He had music playing in the house all the time. And I think that he just encouraged for me to have that type of background. And he had classical music going on all the time. We would always be listening to it when it was in the house, when we were both in the house. I would go to his study, and he would always play Rachmaninoff LPs, old LPs of Rachmaninoff's music. And we just kind of sit there and go through it.
That is so awesome. And actually, at least in my younger years,
Mm.
mirrors how my dad was with us, both me and my sister. It was music appreciation 24/7.
Yeah.
He would play like my uh, memory of the composers and the canons is a little bit rusty at this point because it's been a while, but he would play pictures and we would have to call out the different parts. Oh, we were in it, boy.
That's cool, man. That was one of my, and we went to go see that. He took me to go see that with the orchestra in California, and that was just, I loved that. That was, and I think I saw pictures of the exhibition several. I played that actually for my doctorate. I actually performed the pictures of the exhibition. So, I'll tell you what.
Dr. Ian
I'm a
Gindes,
glutton.
everybody.
I'm a glutton for punishment. So I don't usually use the doctor thing on about 8-10 years of study to actually get the doctorate. Yeah, it took a while. So
Yeah, man. So hold on now. So you were born while you live in Chicago now, you were born and raised in
yes,
California. Where in
that's
Cali?
correct. Visalia. I was actually born and raised in Visalia. We moved down south, and we lived actually, I noticed Allison was from Bakersfield. We lived in Bakersfield for 14 years. My father was actually born in Los Angeles, and I think we would always go traveling to Los Angeles. That's actually where we would go to take vacations. We'd go up to Santa Barbara and stuff. But yeah, California it was great. There was a lot of classical, and there is still a lot of classical
Still a
music
lot of
going on.
classical
A
music.
very culturally inclined, a great state for classical music.
You talked about starting to play the piano when you were like 4 years old, and your dad asking if you wanted to take lessons. And I was one of those kids who would like if I went into a house and they had a piano. I wouldn't even say hello to the host. I was just like beeline towards the piano. And one day my dad asked me if I wanted to take lessons. So eventually he bought a keyboard and I started taking
Okay.
lessons and stuff. And probably about 11 or so, I stopped. But you can tell how old I am. Uh, it was the time when we had music in schools.
No,
So
absolutely. And we would go to field trips and watch the orchestra
Mhm.
perform, and that was kind of the thing that schools would do that. I don't know if they still do. So
The magnet schools do,
mhm.
the regular schools don't, which is unfortunate because as we know, music is a tool to sharpen the mind in
Oh, absolutely.
a lot of different ways. So, you know, I started out on violin and then switched to viola and
Hmm.
played for 9 years. And then I loved the viola. And there was something about the alto voice. I love kind of deeper, richer female
Yeah.
voices, mostly altos and contraltos. So playing the viola kind of fit into that box. And so I've always had an appreciation for melody and arrangements and layering and orchestration and stuff like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And when I listened to your album, I was just like, wow, he is really making that piano sing.
And that funny because over the years, and I'm not kidding when I say this, but like I said, we would go in to my father's den and he would put on all kinds of recordings of all these great pianists playing Rachmaninoff's music, the greats, Van Cliburn, Zoltan Koshish, Kissin, when he was like I think he was like 12 when he was playing like Rachmaninoff Concerti. And he would just play all these LPs. And it was wonderful for me because at that age, even like I think I was like 8 or 9, I was starting to pick things out because I was already starting to do piano lessons. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, I don't like how he did the dynamics there. And we would really kind of go through and be like, nah, I don't like how he brought out that phrase right there. And I was doing that at 8 or 9. And it was wild because, I didn't realize I was actually starting to interpret, a lot of Rachmaninoff's music at, a very young age. And I think, we even, when I was doing piano recitals, when I was at that age, we would listen to how other concert pianists would interpret these things. And it was wonderful. He really did open my eyes for that. And I think one of the biggest things, like you said, by the singing tone, I'm glad that you brought that up. And I top marks for you bringing that up because I think that was one of the most important things that I think that we've missed over the years. I think is to really, really focus on the singing tone and making the line happen. And some of the great pianists in the 1940s and all that we looked at, we found that they were really good at bringing out that singing tone, and that's what we would work on. My father and I would like, that's not singing, that's not legato. We have to work on your legato. And we would just do it just all the time. We would just work at the piano and work on these things. So I was very lucky.
Do you, taking your dad's advice, you teach your own kids music, or are you pushing them into the professions?
Well, we have a very small family, so it's just my wife and I and our dog. So we don't
Okay.
have kids. I'll tell you what, we have focused on so much of this career that sometimes it's, yeah, if we did have children, absolutely, I would
We have
work with them.
nephews and nieces.
I do have my cousins, but none of them are musical. I'm the only person in my family who really kind of strive to do a career in music. So who knows? I guess I'm the lucky guy.
So you, your wife, and the Boston Terrier. But they say music hath charms to calm the savage beast. Do you find that when you play, your dog kind of chills out?
Recently, it has developed this weird thing where it will actually go under my bench. And I have a baby grand, and she'll come and she'll lay right under my bench, and she'll just kind of lay down there.
Okay.
Sometimes I have to move her out of the way because she's right next to the pedals. I don't want
Daughter, yeah.
to, smack on her toe. But yeah, she'll sit there and she'll listen.
While you practice these pieces from the Rachmaninoff album, she comes and
Mhm.
kind of chills out underneath your bench. That
She
that
gives she gives me my inspiration, I guess. Another thing is she's I guess you could say she's also a very positive distraction. So
Yeah.
I always feel like, as musicians, we get so serious about what we do. You know what I mean? And I think that it's good to kind of have her there as just kind of like, okay, come on, you need to loosen up. I don't know. I'll look at a passage. It's very strange. Who knows how other people do it? But I know that for me, I do get very serious about what I do, and sometimes I have to lighten up and make sure that understanding this is supposed to be fun. But yeah, she does that.
The funny thing about that is, I think that because music touches each of us in its own unique way. I appreciate this notion that playing music is supposed to be fun, but you know, in fact, to be a player at an elite level, a player
Mhm.
that has something special to say through the music, that requires a great soul level kind of dedication. And
Yeah, it really does. So there is that for sure. I think, you know, I remember when I was about, I think I was 12 years old. I played the Pavane by Ravel. I'm sure you
oh,
know that piece,
yes.
and I played, and oh my gosh, we prepared the living daylights out of that when I was 12 years old, and I performed it, and I remember just really feeling it when I performed it for the very first time as a pianist. I really kind of sat there and closed my eyes and actually really just let the music let
Mm.
go. And I remember my father came up to me afterwards and he looked at me, and that was kind of where he knew. He said, "You are a pianist. You are going to be a concert pianist." And he knew that I had a talent. I didn't know. He knew that I had a talent to do this. And I think it was at that point because I felt the very sensitive nature of the composer, and I was able to convey that to an audience. A lot of pianists in my field can be very technical, and that's great. I think that what he felt was my attribute, at least that was really good about my music, was is that it had a very, sensitive, streak to it. It really reached an audience. It was very sentimental, and it had a very big heart behind it. So that was kind of the thing. He said that that's what you have, So, and I took that very seriously. So.
That is a wonderful story, and I really appreciate that because that's absolutely what came through for me.
Mhm.
The irony is I just got a call from Greg Selson,
Okay.
and he's like, "Oh, there's this piano player from Chicago. He's got classical albums, piano Rachmaninoff." And I thought, "Oh, okay." And
Take a look. Let's listen to this Rachmaninoff and see
yeah,
how he develops this.
let's listen to this. And the thing that stuck out for me was absolutely this the heart behind it and the interpretation, and it didn't feel overly technical, although it was obvious that you were a master.
No,
um
I think that's the hardest thing I think even in jazz music, it's kind of gone down that, and I've been told that it's kind of gone down that we're so technical these days, and we forget that it's they're not technical. The technical essence of the music and the emotional part of the music are not mutually exclusive. So the thing is that you got to put those together, and when you put them together, that's what actually my father used to say: when it gets harder, you're on the right track. And I,
yeah.
I understand that now, because it's like when it gets hard, when you're like, wow, this is really hard to do this on the piano to accentuate what I'm trying to do emotionally.
Mhm.
I know I'm on the right track, because it's not supposed to be easy. And now audiences will say, well, you made that look easy.
Right.
And as we're up there doing this, it's not as easy as it looks. We're really sitting there trying to tune into every type of detail that's in there. But I think that the most important thing, particularly in that recording, was to how far can I dive deep into this? How can I? And I think I also mentioned this was kind of like a lifetime of research in 14 tracks. It really, because I listened to all these pianists, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of times, and I'm like, what is it about that pianist that, how did that reach me? And it's not something we can explain in words. Yeah, we could say he did a coloring nuance right here that really captured my interest.
Mhm.
But why is that? What did he do right there that really captured me? And I really just would sit there, and sometimes I would just take a passage that pianist did. I would just play it like hundreds and hundreds of times. I know that sounds obsessive compulsive, but I'm like, what was he doing here? And I think by engaging that way, I think we took this Rachmaninoff, which I had a great artistic director. She was also in my studio, and she was kind of my extra set of ears, you know.
Hmm.
So she kept me, you know. I think that the thing that I noticed through this, and it took 3 years to do this recording, was more and more of me removing myself from the
Mm.
music and letting the music speak for itself. That was the hard part. I really had to humble myself. I really had to come back and say, wow, that sounded really terrible. And I really need to make sure that I do such and such, you know, or the balance is not correct here. It's not being conveyed correctly.
Mhm.
And it was a journey because the composer is so important to me. That just put extra, you know, pressure on for me to kind of to develop it. I'm like, can I really do this justice? You know, can this really, you know, reach people? And can I reach people? And again, it wasn't. It's. I always think, yeah, it's about the artist myself, but
Mhm.
more importantly, it's about what was the composer trying to say here. And I always tell when you see great performances, and you'll probably say this, Thornell, like, hey, I went to go see like Beethoven's music, and I hear something. It's like, yeah, that's Beethoven, right?
Right.
And you just can't. You just like it's like you're almost captured by it, right? You get the chills. You're like, it's almost kind of like their ghost is like coming back. It's phenomenal, and I think that that's the biggest thing that we try to develop, like as classical musicians, is how can I bring that composer's voice? What is that authentic voice that people can hear? And I really hope that I did that. That was the biggest thing that I wanted to do with this recording. And I think that that also goes into the, like, you know, we're talking about technical things and stuff like that. What are those technical things that I need to do to make this happen? So, and I think
When you
it's
go to
both.
30,000 feet, I'm having a brain fart.
No, no, you're good.
There's an author who wrote it's a book called Blink, and in it he introduces this concept of in order to become an expert at something, you have to do it 10,000 hours, right?
Mhm.
And to the point where it's like dare I say second nature, and you're not thinking about it, right?
Right.
And the fact that you've been like introduced to this repertoire from a young age, and you've heard it played hundreds of different ways, you
Right.
bring to it a kind of both an academic as well as a kind of, I'm going to say it this way, cellular level appreciation for the music that to me shines.
Absolutely.
It
Well,
literally
absolutely.
was shocking to me because I was like, it's the first time I've heard Rachmaninoff that it didn't feel pompous.
No, it's true. And Rachmaninoff shouldn't feel pompous. That's Rachmaninoff. And when you hear Rachmaninoff, it's so funny. And even like, not even like Rachmaninoff, but other composers like Chopin or
Mm.
Schumann and all these composers, when you hear their music and you actually, you hear their voice come through, you're like I was saying, you're like, yes, that's Schumann. It's almost it's uncanny. It's just like wow. It's only there's I know this kind of sounds ominous. They're speaking from the dead. Their voices are eternal in that sense. I know it sounds crazy, but it's just like it's almost, and I think that that's what gives the chills. It's like it's almost haunting. It's like wow, okay, I see. That's Rachmaninoff humor. You know what I
Right.
mean? He
Yeah.
has his own specific humor.
Mhm.
If it is pompous, it's pompous because the composer wants to be that. He
Mhm.
wants to show off here, and
Right.
he is giving the artist the opportunity to do that. But it shouldn't be pompous for the sake of it's pompous because the interpreter gets lost in themselves. They're not conveying the composer anymore. They're conveying themselves, and it's not about the composer. And that is where we kind of fall. I guess you kind of fall into that trap. I was falling into that trap doing this recording, and luckily I had somebody tell me you need to dial this back.
Right. Right.
You need to be Ian. You need to really listen to what you're doing here, and that was really good. I had a really good artistic director that she really kept me honest with myself.
So for the people who haven't seen it yet, you got to go watch this 3-minute piece. It's FYC digest where Ian sits there in front of the piano and talks about the record and the recording process, and we get a glimpse of this artistic director.
Yeah.
And that little 3 minutes blew me away.
And I owe that to actually the guy who did the video on that. That was Matt, my buddy Matt. He's fantastic at we've done so many videos this year. He knew pretty much at that point, we knew kind of what we wanted to capture. And I think I talked about that grand style of playing, and
that's where I was going.
Yeah.
I learned, I was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Because I remember when I was a kid, looking at old archival stuff.
It was so different, Thornhill, wasn't it? It was kind of like when you see a concert pianist, you're like, hey, the hands are coming off, they're coming down. I love using the word panache. It's like they had like a sense of panache to like what they were doing, because it was entertainment too, you know? And I think that like, you know, like when you saw like Vladimir Horowitz or Van Cliburn and all of these guys, you know, when they played, it was very physical. And it wasn't because like, oh, okay, I'm Van Cliburn and I want to get up here and, you know, show off what I'm doing. No, it was a part of the showmanship of the music and what the composer intended it to be. And I think that was the grand style. And I think that was very well celebrated, you know, particularly 1920s and stuff like that. You know, we had so many concert pianists at that period of time that I think we kind of started going astray from that. I do blame it a little bit on the recording industry because everybody wants to be note perfect. But as we know, note perfect is not music, and it's not conveying the soul. And actually what happens is when you start to become more note perfect, not to say that, you know, we're artisans and you don't want to have a mess, but when you start to go down that road, it starts to become void of emotion, and it starts to really lose that catch. And I think even pianists like Arthur Rubinstein, you know, when people talk about taking risks, they're like, oh, that person plays really fast. That's not risk taking. Risk taking is actually reaching the heart of the music. And like I said, you know, earlier, when it gets harder for you to play it in a certain way, you're on the right track, because it's not a real risk if you can play, you know, 1,000 notes, you know, pristinely. That's not risk taking. Anybody can do that. What is risk taking is actually playing those notes in such a way that you sincerely feel that is actually pushing out something that is different. It's almost kind of experimental in a way. And I think that was a part of that grand style playing. There was two things about it. There was the singing tone, which we were talking about, and then there was the very physical essence of conveying that, the rhetorical essence, the physical way of doing that. Whether the person was coming down on the keys and really putting his back in. A lot of the schools that I worked, that I was trained in, kind of had this flowing technique where the hands would just kind of like flow. It's like you're bringing the music to the audience, you know. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm trying to show off here. I'm trying to rhetorically show you what this cascade of notes is doing rhetorically by physically showing you this. And I think that was the grand style playing. And I think that I hope that was one of the big things I wanted to bring to this recording. I'm like, hey, let's get back to where our roots were. Let's stop with the note perfect stuff. And I mean, it is I don't want to put myself on a pedestal. It is clean. But it's not clean for the sake of just being clean. It's clean for the sake of, I tried to get it in such a way where, you know, hey, I'm really conveying. A lot of artists don't like recording because of this.
This podcast, for the lack of a better term, is called Impact Music, Media, and Culture. And so, speaking of like classical music in contemporary pop culture, do you watch Bridgerton?
No, I'm not. No,
Bridgerton is this wonderful show it's a series that's written and produced by Shonda Rhimes. It takes colorblind casting, and it takes place in, oh my goodness, the 1500s. Yeah, so all the music is like chamber music and classical music and stuff, and familiarize yourself with it. It's really
No, I'll have to check that out for sure.
And what they will do is they will do string arrangements of pop songs and pop them in there periodically, and you'll be like, hold on, I know that Mitch. Hold on, that's Ariana Grande. And so musically, it's a real kick in the pants. I really like it.
It was crazy. Yeah, and it's funny because we forget Rachmaninoff's music, and particularly because he ended up dying in Beverly Hills. Actually, he was a Los Angeles guy. And it's so funny. It sounds so strange because he was from Russia, but then because I think, well, because communism was coming in, he was forced in exile, and he basically had to come to the United States. But you know, Disney and everything, Hollywood really captured the essence of Rachmaninoff's music, whether they were playing it or they were influenced by it.
Hmm.
And I think that it was a big part. And so every time I hear movie music, I'm like, I see that you could kind of hear the signature of Rachmaninoff in there. And it's I think that in popular culture today, I think people are starting to become again aware of that if they
Yeah.
weren't already. And I think that Rachmaninoff's music was so important for certainly for film writers. Are you kidding me? I mean, a lot of like John Williams and all these guys were certainly you can hear Rachmaninoff in all of their stuff. And I think that that's it's so important. That's actually where we put a bonus track on the CD from called Alone in the World. That was actually from the movie The Russia House, the 1990 film with Sean Connery, Michelle Pfeiffer. Fantastic movie. I don't know if you've seen that, Thornell, but it's a great, great flick. Um, and we kind of we took that, and it was actually infused. We infused it, made it jazz, put jazz in there because actually Rachmaninoff's music was going that direction. So it's funny where you kind of like, well, wait a minute. So there's jazz music in Rachmaninoff, and he was already talking about open seventh chords, and and he was, I mean, he was utilizing that. Yeah, he was utilizing that in the early 1900s. So a lot of that, and then eventually that became Hollywood-esque, and sometimes I talk to people, they're like, Rachmaninoff's music really sounds like really noir, LA noir music. I never thought of it that way. I was like, okay. I think it's coming back in that way. I think we're starting to circle back.
For those of us who know, people get into positions of power and then they tap into their, their own tastes and their own experiences and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
We were working with an artist last year named Sean. I don't remember Sean's name, but he did the music for Marvel's superhero girls for like
Okay.
5 years. Just the musical references and stuff that was packed into that, and for
Mm-hmm.
kids who are paying attention, they're being introduced to certain sonics and things of that nature. I remember, like I was saying before, I grew up at a time when there was music in schools and we had
Sure.
orchestra and my okay, so there were two guys who were in our school. One was the district head of music, and then there was the head of music in my school. And
Sure.
I tell you, Dr. Kleinman did not like me for some reason, but
There's
everybody else
always
was
one
like,
of those guys.
I was like, look, I was good. I was second chair of the all county orchestra, and that was only because the head of the district had his office in our school, and he took a liking to me and he used to give me private lessons.
Okay.
So this whole idea of the grand style of playing and stuff like that, I totally get it. I used to like student conduct the orchestra.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was really into it. And I
Sure.
could see Dr. climbing off to the side, shaking his head like, oh, you're
Oh God,
not
that's awful.
serious enough. I'm like, no, no, this is music. You're supposed to feel it. Before we started, you
Mm-hmm.
talked about your side career, your side hustle, um,
Mm-hmm.
in the Illinois National Guard.
Yes.
I'm really enjoying this conversation for so many reasons, but
Sure.
not the least of which, when I first got out of college, my first job was with IBM, and
Okay.
very regimented, very blue
Oh yeah.
suit, white shirt,
Sure.
and here are the rules, and this is how you're supposed to be. But I have always just kind of lived my life authentically, not even maybe knowing that I was flaunting the rules and stuff like that. I was elected president of my marketing class. And
Okay.
so we're down in Dallas going through training and doing all this stuff. And at the end of the week, we would have happy hour, and I would sit there and I played the piano and I would sing and stuff. And I didn't realize that I was making an impression on my classmates. Probably 3 weeks or a month that they were there, we had our graduation ceremony. Everybody's graduating from the class and getting their certificates and things of that nature.
Mhm.
And they insisted
Mhm.
that I play. So they wheeled in a piano and I played and stuff. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I am because everybody asked me to, etc. And it was just like, and it got back to my uplines up in Manhattan, and they were like, "Wow, we heard that you da 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 da." And I was just like, "I'm just being me. That's my story. In your role in the National Guard, do you put your music in a box or do you carry it with you
Oh
if
my
you're in
gosh.
that
I'll
situation?"
I'll tell you a great story. I'll tell you this. This is probably one of my favorites, and I always tell this. It's so funny because when I joined the National Guard, I think it was in '03. I think I went to basic training in '04, and that was kind of right after 9/11. Those of us who actually were there. Anyway, so I was in there in 2004 at basic training, and we were waiting. We had to go through the administration stuff like that before we went to basic training. And I remember they were just telling us, "You're going to the sandbox. You're going to the sandbox." I'm like, "Hey, I joined the National Guard. Hey, I'm going to help with natural disaster." No, you're going to the sandbox. I'm like, "Great. Well, that's the end of my piano career." I was really worried about that, and because I've been doing it for years. And I think there was a day we were all kind of huddled in. It must have been like, I don't know, like close to 600 of us dressed up in uniform. And we were they kind of shuttled us into a cafeteria, or actually it was a theater room. I don't know. It was really weird. And on the theater, on the stage, they actually had an upright piano up there.
Mhm.
And I remember the sergeant was sitting up there. He was in charge of a bunch of us. And he said, "Hey, does anybody know how to play the piano?" And I'm like, so my stupid self is back there. And I'm kind of like, my hand just shot right up, right? I'm like, why did I just do that? And then he said, "Get up here." So I'm like, okay, here we go. And I'm walking up, because it was funny. Right when I was doing that, I was thinking, well, my career as a pianist is over. And I was really feeling depressed. I was thinking that in my head. Go up to the stage, and he looks at me, he says, "Well, what do you play?" And so I'm like at the position of attention, and I'm like, "Well, Sergeant, I play Mozart, Beethoven." He's like, "Mm-hmm." He says, "Go over the piano and play over there, right?" So I started playing Beethoven because I was thinking I had this in my hands, and I started playing, and it starts very simple. It's his Wallstein sonata, which is really hard, and it sounds very simple. So people thought I was just fuddling around at the piano at first. Then it got really sophisticated, and people were like, "The hell is going on around here?" And then he comes over. I don't know if he was just joking. He's like, "What the hell? Like somebody played a trick on him, and he's looking in the piano. Like, is somebody operating this? Did I just get had or something? You
Right.
know, was this already set up for me to like?" And so I played another piece by Franz Liszt, romantic composer. It was a really hard piece, very flashy, as you know. And I played, and then I swear, Thornell, like after I got done with that piece, is really flashy and stuff. Like everybody shot out of their seat, man. It was unbelievable, man. I had 600 people, probably the biggest crowd I've ever played yet of people in uniform. And I'm not kidding you. This guy actually came up to the stage and he said, "Do you know Chopin's Polonaise?" I'm like, "Where the hell am I?" Because initially I was like, well, I'm in the army, and not to say, that army folks don't know art. And actually, to be honest with you, as long as I've been in, I've noticed there are a lot of artistic people in the army, and there are a lot of people that actually have made artistic careers while, the army actually was a part of their life. It was a wonderful experience, and I'll never forget it. I knew at that point that this is something that I could never give up, because
Right.
there is something, whether you're a religious person, you're spiritual, it's something that we're called to, whether you want to look at it as your vocation. One of the biggest crowds I played for. When am I going to get into trouble over here for
That is a great story. It could have gone another way, but instead,
I I'm glad it did not go the other. Right before we went to basic training, man, it was nuts. It was just a very intense but a great moment in my life, and I think I've eaten it up ever since, and I always have. I guess you could say I've always liked to be the center of attention when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, and all musicians, we do have a little bit of an ego streak because why wouldn't we? I think one of the things that resonated me for pianists and artists as a whole, I'm not just talking about classical pianists,
Hmm.
but if you see a great artist perform, whether you're on Broadway, whether you're watching a theater production, there's kind of like this aura that goes around an artist, right? And you're like, that person has it, and it's just like that person is. And I remember very well when I wanted to do this, I saw a Spanish pianist. His name was Enrique. I'm going to get his name right. Enrique de Guzman, I think. And he played the Schumann Piano Concerto with the orchestra when I was very young. And the way that he came out to the stage was just very, very graceful. And the way that he played and he exuded this, like you're talking about that singing tone and the way that he brought up those colors, he had this aura around him. You know what I mean? It's just like, wow, that is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I think that he really reached me. So it's wonderful to see that. So, but
I love your through line. It is
mhm,
extraordinary,
mhm.
and your commitment to the music and your opportunities to shine. And obviously other people love it too. You're just coming back from Georgia,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I did a performance down in Noonan. This is the third season I've been with those folks. That was my first really paid, actually, my first season with them. That was my first real paid performance. I actually was paid a good amount of money. And boy, I'll tell you with that one, Tornell, that I couldn't sleep that whole night. The night before that, I was giving an extremely hard recital that was going to have to happen. Oh my God, I was running in circles. And luckily, Kathy, who's is the director of that center there, she was just wonderful. And I remember the second season I came out there was funny. I was waiting to get on stage, and right before it was about ready to go on stage, and Kathy looks at me. She's like, "Do you get nervous at this point?"
Yes.
She was probably just trying to lighten me up. It was so funny, and she was so sweet. There's such a great crowd over there. I've played from really bad performances to how we think of them as a bad performance to really fantastic ones. And even the bad performances, and I don't know what it is, for some odd reason, they go for it. They're like, wow, that was wonderful. And all you could say is like, well, thank you. But I I've played for every audience I've played for, luckily to this day, and knock on wood, has been wonderfully receptive. Yes, has been wonderfully receptive to what I'm doing up there. I think what it is even if I'm not playing no perfect performances, or if a passage sounds sloppy or it doesn't come, I think it's the expression that I really worked on that is reaching people. That's what it is. I think, I had, and my wife tells me that all the time too, because she right sizes me because I'm like, oh my God, I played terribly. I went to a Rotary Club function and I played the Stars and Stripes, a Horowitz rendition of this. And I think it's really hard. And I remember playing this performance for the Rotary Club, and I didn't think I played it really well, and they had a huge audience there. And I remember at the end, they gave me a standing ovation, and I came back home and I was calling my wife up. I'm like, I didn't play that well. It really didn't go well, and I don't know. And they gave me a standing ovation. She's like, wait a minute. She says, rewind back. They gave you a standing ovation. She said they liked it. And that's what matters. And so I was like, oh my God, I thought I played terribly. And she's like, you need to stop.
Well, I
And I
like
guess
your
that's what
wife.
happens.
She's telling the truth.
No, she does. She does, man. There are those performances where you really are in the zone, and it's like everything is just like everything's clicking, everything's just like there. It's kind of like, Michael Jordan, and he's just basically going out there, and he doesn't even have to think about what he's doing. He's just in the zone. And you feel that, you're like, man, if somebody pushed me over, I think that I still would actually play this passage correctly. You know what I mean? And then like you get then those performances, which are like few and far in between. We usually kind of shoot for 80%, but those are like the 95 percentile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are phenomenal. And when you get to the end of the piece, everybody's gonna shoot out of their seat. You know that you basically delivered it. So those are prizes. So, but I guess you have to kind of look at the good and the bad. So,
Well, delivering the emotion and the intent of the composer, and like you said, getting out of your own way
mhm.
leads to those kinds of performances. I mean, you referenced Michael Jordan, just like an athlete. That it is that notion of being in flow.
No, yeah, it's kind of like it's just like you're so meditatively in tuned. You're just like there's nothing that really that at this point you're just like unstoppable, and it is such a good feeling because you're really conveying everything you wanted to convey. I think that I've been told over the years, though, I right size, like I say, I right size myself. My wife does that too. That those are the few ones that come few and far in between. But generally, if you're shooting for about 80 percentile, you're okay. You get your 80%, you're good. And 80% probably sounds to a lot of audience members is, hey, this is 100% to me.
Right.
So and that's fine. So, and I think the performance that I did was pretty good. I think I played a bunch of the Rachmaninoff on there, and some of those pieces are so hard. It's so funny. A lot of them that sound really hard are not. They're not hard. The ones that sound easy are actually the hardest ones.
Really?
When you're bringing out a singing line that's so naked on the top that if you hit a wrong note, it's like the difference between night and day. And bringing out the emphatic way of doing that, where the texture is very sparse, actually is very difficult. So when you're playing a bunch of notes and 1,000 notes, yeah, you're going to have clinkers and stuff like that. You can hide that, but you can't hide when you have a very huge singing tone what's coming out, and you really have to accentuate that. I mean, that's where I always say to my wife, that separates the men from the boys. When you get into a soft movement, and when you're actually in a slow movement, then I'm like, okay, now I really am I'm listening to what this person is trying to show me. Right. And that's where I could really tell where that pianist is coming from. If that person is really putting their heart on their shoulder. So,
Well, Ian, you put your heart on your shoulder on this album. We're so excited. We're coming to an end here. I did want to ask you if there was anything specific you wanted to say or share before we.
I think I'm just glad thank you, Thornell, for doing this. This is really excellent, man. I'm glad that you guys have been helping out. This album really did take about a 3-year project. I'm glad, in one sense, I'm glad it's finally done, because I think my artistic director, Anne Marie, she just said, at one point, she said, Ian, if you touch that piece again, I'm going to kill you. She's like, I'm done with this. Stop. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, maybe I should get that passage. Nope, you're done. I'm like, you're right. I'm gonna stop. Our artistic director's great, man. They're like, they kind of like, you need to stop it. You know what I mean? You're gonna make it worse. Don't fix what's not broken. So, but no, I'm glad that you had me. Thank you for having me on this, Thornell. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. I really appreciate it. And to get Rachmaninoff out there, it would be wonderful to get a nomination for this album. Is that the most important thing? No, the most important thing is to actually, and I know this sounds cheesy, but it's really to get this out and to have an opportunity to actually record his music. And that's what was definitely important. I actually got an opportunity to do that in my life. So and I tried to develop it in such a way that was true to him. So that was the most important thing to me. Very truthful. That's not a bunch of BS or anything like that. It's honestly what I wanted to do. So, and I set that out. So.
Well, you achieved it. We'll, put all the how to follow you and all that kind of stuff. So we don't have to
Mm,
walk through that, or whatever. But this has been great. I
yeah.
I love telling my stories, and I love hearing the artist stories, um, and making connection. I It's fascinating,
Yeah.
how people can grow up in different coasts and in different countries and things of that nature. And
Oh yeah.
the conversation, the language around the music is what bothers them. I'm going to enjoy listening to your album again.
Oh, wonderful. That that means so much to me. It really does because people will come in, they'll say, "Wow, you really do express Rachmaninoff so emphatically," and that means a lot because they're really hearing all the hard work that went into that, and you know how some of those passages are, man. It's just like, oh my gosh, if I have to play these seven measures one more time, man. I and there were points where my engineer's like, she's like, you need to probably take a break, Ian. I think you're going to break the piano. We went over some passages. We would actually take some pieces and we would go for about 3 hours and
Oh
just
my
do it
goodness.
over and over and over and over again, just to make sure that it was just the right way.
Gotcha.
So
Well, I'm glad that Anne Marie was there to keep you
mhm.
from going off the edge, and
Yes,
going off the edge, going off the ledge, and that we have the blessing of
yeah.
having this wonderful piece, uh, and a collection of pieces that we can explore, and it, that I hope that you would think is your definitive collection and representation of our music.
No, I think, this is my second album. The one I put out in 2016 was called American Visions. And I really do think they're getting better and better as I go. I learn so much when I do these albums. No kidding. It really is true. It's like, well, there's some things I didn't like about my first album. Okay, what can I do to make that better? And I think it's just, as an artist, we strive for perfection. We're
Yeah,
never going to reach it, but I think that, we always strive for, hey, let's continue to see where we can get to exude, how much emotion can we exude out of this, and how can we make this better?